Elias Thorne's hands were maps of 80 years, creased with the memory of engine grease, splintered wood, and the frantic grip of dying men. They moved with a slow, deliberate grace. On the morning of his 80th birthday, those hands were coaxing a stubborn fence post into the unyielding soil of his small farm. The sun, a pale gold coin in the autumn sky, offered little warmth, but Elias didn't mind. The work was its own heat, a familiar rhythm against the deep quiet of his life. He was setting the post when the sound of a sputtering engine drew his gaze to the dirt road bordering his property. A station wagon, laden with all the hopeful baggage of a new life, had coughed its last and coasted to a stop. A young man, his face a mask of frustration, got out and kicked a tire. A woman emerged from the passenger side, her shoulders slumped in defeat, while two small children peered from the back window, their faces pressed against the glass. Elias wiped his hands on his overalls, the gesture automatic, and walked toward them. He moved without haste, his gait the steady roll of a man who had walked across landscapes far less forgiving than this. "Trouble?" he asked, his voice a low rumble, weathered as old barnwood. The young man, whose name was Ben Gallagher, sighed. "Just my luck. The engine just quit. We're moving into the old Miller place down the road. Or we were." Elias nodded, his eyes taking in the worn tires, the worried lines on the woman's face. He saw not an inconvenience, but a story of struggle he knew well. He'd seen it in the faces of young enlistees, in the eyes of his late wife Martha when the harvests were lean. "Pop the hood," he said, not as a question, but as a gentle command. For the next hour, Elias worked. He diagnosed the problema faulty alternator and, then, with a quiet confidence that belied his age, he set about fixing it. He didn't have the right part, of course, but he had something better. A lifetime of making do. He tinkered and adjusted, using a bit of wire from his own toolbox and a well-placed piece of rubber to create a temporary but solid bypass. The engine turned over, coughed, and then settled into a steady, grateful hum. Sarah Gallagher, Ben's wife, had tears in her eyes. We don't have much to pay you right now. We spent everything on the deposit." Elias waved a dismissive hand, a gesture that was both kind and final. A glass of water would be fine. He accepted it, drank it slowly, and handed the empty glass back. "You get your family settled, that's payment enough." He turned and walked back to his fence post, leaving the Gallaghers staring after him, speechless. He did not think of it as an act of charity. It was simply what a neighbor did. In the vast, echoing silence of his widower's life, the simple act of being useful was a small anchor in a drifting sea. He was entirely unaware that this small kindness, offered without expectation, had just set in motion the currents that would change his world. Later that day, Elias cleaned himself up. He put on a crisp, checkered shirt, the one Martha had always liked, and drove his old pickup into town. It was his tradition. Every year on his birthday, he would go to the town's only diner, order a slice of apple pie with a scoop of vanilla ice cream, and sit in a booth by the window. It was a quiet celebration, a nod to the passing of another year, another season weathered alone. He sat in his usual booth, the red vinyl cracked like dry earth. The waitress, a teenager named Chloe with headphones slung around her neck, took his order with an impatient tap of her pen. When she brought the pie, Elias had placed a single, slightly crooked candle in the middle. He fumbled with a book of matches, his gnarled fingers struggling with the small stick. At a nearby table, a group of local youths snickered. One of them, a boy with a swagger that far outpaced his wisdom, spoke just loud enough to be heard. "Look at the old-timer having a birthday party all by himself. Kinda sad, isn't it?" Another laughed. "My grandpa did that. Sat around waiting for a call that never came. Guess some people just get forgotten." The words were not meant to be daggers, but they found their mark. They pierced the fragile peace Elias had built around himself. He felt a familiar coldness creep into his chest, the same chill he'd felt in the monsoon rains of a long-ago war, the same hollow ache that had settled in when he buried Martha. He wasn't angry. He was simply confirmed. The world had moved on, and he was a relic, a black and white photograph in a digital age. The laughter felt less like mockery and more like a final verdict. His hand trembled slightly as he finally lit the candle. He didn't make a wish. He just watched the small flame dance, a tiny, defiant light in the growing dimness of his own spirit. He blew it out, the wisp of smoke rising like a ghost, and ate his pie in silence. He didn't taste the apples or the cinnamon. He tasted only loneliness. He paid his bill and left, the teenager's careless laughter following him out the door. He drove home under a sky that had turned the color of a bruise, the world feeling colder and emptier than it had that morning. But Elias had not been the only one to hear the boy's comments. In a booth across the diner, nursing a cup of coffee she could barely afford, sat Sarah Gallagher. She had come to town to sign the final papers for the house and had stopped for a moment of rest. She saw the whole thing, the old man's quiet dignity, the single candle, the cruel, unthinking words. Her heart, already full of gratitude for his earlier kindness, now burned with a fierce, protective anger. Forgotten? That man had saved her family today. He had offered them grace when they were at their lowest, and he had asked for nothing. The injustice of it settled deep in her soul. She watched him leave, his shoulders a little less straight than they had been that morning, and knew she had to do something. It wasn't enough to be grateful. Gratitude demanded action. That night, after putting her exhausted children to bed in their new, dusty home, Sarah sat at her kitchen table, a laptop open before her. The internet connection was spotty, but her resolve was not. She wanted to show Elias that he wasn't forgotten. But how? She knew nothing about him, other than his name and the fact that he was kind. She started with a simple search: Elias Thorne, Westbrook. It brought up property records, tax information, nothing of substance. She remembered Ben mentioning the man looked like he'd been through a war. On a hunt, she added veteran to her search. The digital trail was faint, overgrown with the weeds of time, but Sarah was persistent. She spent hours sifting through forums, military archives, and digitized newspaper clippings. She found a mention of an Army medic named Elias Thorne serving in the Honest Cavalry Division in Vietnam. Then, on an obscure veteran's message board from over a decade ago, she found it. A post from a man looking for his old unit. He wrote, "I'm trying to find the men of Alpha Company, 21 Battalion, 7th Cavalry, who were at LZ X-Ray in 65. I'm especially looking for our medic. We just called him Doc." His real name was Elias Thorne. He saved my CO's life during a mortar attack. Captain Wainwright wouldn't have made it if not for Doc Thorne. He kept him alive for 6 hours under heavy fire. I'd love to thank him. Sarah's breath caught in her throat. Captain Wainwright. It was a solid lead, a name. She began a new search, this time for an Army captain named Wainwright, who served in the Honest Cavalry. The search was more difficult. There were many Wainwrights, but she cross-referenced dates, service records, and locations. Finally, she found him. He was no longer Captain Wainwright. He was General Marcus Wainwright, a 5-star general, a man who had served as chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff before his recent retirement, a living legend in military circles. Sarah stared at the screen, at the official portrait of a man with eyes that had seen the world and a jaw set with the firmness of command. This was the man whose life Elias had saved. Her plan, initially small and uncertain, now felt immense, audacious. She found a public contact email for the General's Foundation. With trembling fingers, she began to type. She told him everything. She told him about the broken-down car, the quiet kindness of the old man who fixed it. She told him about the diner, the single candle, and the cruel laughter. And she told him what she had found online, about a medic named Doc Thorne who saved a young captain's life half a world away. She didn't know if he would even see the email, let alone respond, but she had to try. She hit send and watched the word disappear into the digital ether. In the days that followed, a subtle shift began in Westbrook. Sarah, unable to keep her story to herself, had spoken to the diner owner, a man named George, who had known Elias for years and felt a deep shame for not intervening. George started making sure Elias's coffee was always free. The story spread, a quiet ripple of guilt and newfound respect. One morning, Elias found a freshly baked apple pie on his porch, with a simple, anonymous note, "Thank you." A few days later, He noticed his slightly dented mailbox had been replaced with a brand new one. The kids who used to cut across his lawn started walking around it, sometimes offering a hesitant wave. The community, awakened from its slumber of indifference by Sarah's story, began to respond. It wasn't a parade or a public ceremony. It was a series of small, quiet gestures, an unspoken apology, a collective effort to mend a fence they hadn't realized was broken. Elias, confused but warmed by the gestures, accepted them with the same quiet grace with which he accepted all things. He felt a little less invisible, a little less alone. Then, a week after Sarah sent the email, a sleek black car, so out of place it might as well have been a spaceship, rolled down the dirt road and pulled up in front of Elias Thorne's farmhouse. A man in a simple but perfectly tailored suit stepped out from the driver's side and opened the rear door. Out stepped a tall, broad-shouldered man with silver hair and an air of unmistakable authority. Even in civilian clothes, he carried the posture of a lifetime of command. It was General Marcus Wainwright. He walked up the stone path to the porch, his steps firm and measured. He looked at the simple, well-kept house, the neatly stacked firewood, the rows of tilled earth waiting for spring. He saw a life of order, of quiet duty. He knocked on the door. Elias opened it, his brow furrowed in confusion. He saw the stranger, the car, and for a fleeting moment, the old anxieties of a man who has seen too much surfaced. The general's stern face softened. He looked at Elias, and for a moment, he wasn't a five-star general, but a 24-year-old captain lying in the blood-soaked mud of the Ayadrang Valley. "Doc?" he asked, his voice thick with an emotion that had been held in check for over 50 years. "Is that you? It's Marcus Wainwright." Elias stared. The name, buried under decades of memory, rose to the surface. He saw a flash of jungle green, smelled the acrid scent of cordite and fear. He saw a young officer, pale and bleeding, his own hands pressing down on the wound, whispering promises that he had no right to believe would be kept. "Captain," Elias whispered, the name feeling foreign on his tongue. "My God, it is you." Wainwright's eyes glistened. "It's General now, Doc, but to you, I'll always be the stupid lieutenant who got himself shot." He smiled, a genuine, powerful thing. "May I come in?" They sat in Elias's small, sun-drenched living room, surrounded by Martha's faded photographs and the scent of old books. For a long time, they just looked at each other, bridging the chasm of half a century with a shared, silent understanding. "I got an email," Wainwright began, his voice low and reverent, "from a young woman here, a Mrs. Gallagher. She told me you were here. She told me you fixed her car, and she told me about your birthday." Elias looked down at his hands, a faint flush rising on his weathered cheeks. "It was nothing." "It was everything," Wainwright corrected, his tone firm. "It was you. You've been doing this your whole life, haven't you? Fixing what's broken, mending what's torn, whether it's a fuel line or a man." He leaned forward. "Do you remember that day, Doc? The mortar rounds were coming in like rain. I took shrapnel in my side. I was bleeding out. The medevac choppers couldn't land. Everyone thought I was gone." Elias nodded slowly. "I remember." "But you didn't," Wainwright continued, his voice cracking slightly. "You stayed with me. You used your own shirt to pack the wound when you ran out of bandages. You kept talking to me, telling me about your girl back home, Martha. You told me you were going to marry her and buy a small piece of land. You painted a picture of a peaceful world for me while ours was burning down. You kept me anchored to life, Doc. For 6 hours, you were the only thing between me and death." Elias shook his head, uncomfortable with the praise. "I was just doing my job, sir. I was a medic." "No," Wainwright insisted, reaching into his jacket. "You were a lifeline. I built my entire life on the foundation you gave me in those 6 hours. I had a career. I'm married. I have children, grandchildren. All of it is because of you." He pulled out a small, heavy object and placed it in Elias's hand. It was a challenge coin, thick and bronze. On one side was the 5-star insignia of a general of the army. On the other, the crest of the 1st Cavalry Division, and etched beneath it were 2 simple words: "For Doc." "I've had this for 20 years, Wainwright said. "I've carried it everywhere. hoping one day I might find you and give it to you. It's a poor substitute for the life you gave me, but it's the best I can do." Tears welled in Elias Thorne's eyes for the first time since Martha's funeral. He stared at the coin, its weight, a solid, grounding presence in his palm. It wasn't a medal for a forgotten war. It was a receipt, a testament, proof that his life, his service, his quiet acts of mending had mattered. The mockery in the diner, the years of silence, the feeling of being a ghost in his own life, it all dissolved in the profound weight of this simple bronze coin. "Thank you, Marcus," he said, using the general's first name for the first time. The word was full, not hollow. They talked for another hour, two old soldiers speaking a language no one else could understand. When Wainwright finally stood to leave, he placed a hand on Elias's shoulder. "The world may forget," he said softly, "but we don't. The ones who were there, we never forget." After the black car disappeared down the road, Elias stood on his porch for a long time, the coin warm in his hand. The chill was gone from his bones. The silence in his house no longer felt like a weight, but like a peaceful quiet. The next morning, the sun was bright and clear. Elias walked out to his small, tilled garden, the coin safe in his pocket. He saw the Gallaghers walking up his path, Ben carrying a small bag of saplings, Sarah holding a thermos of coffee, and their two children trailing behind, their faces full of shy smiles. "We thought you might like some company," Sarah said, her voice warm, "and some help with the spring planting." Elias looked at them, at the young family starting their life on this land, and then at the empty patch of earth before him. He saw the pie on his counter, remembered the new mailbox, and felt the coin in his pocket. He was not a relic. He was a root, deep in the soil of this place, connected to a past that gave him strength and a future that was now, unexpectedly, bright with promise. He smiled, a genuine, crinkling smile that reached his eyes. "I'd like that very much," he said. Under the vast and silent sky, surrounded by the quiet hum of a community that had finally learned to see him, Elias Thorne knelt down, took a sapling from the bag, and began to plant. He was planting for a future he finally believed he would be a part of.